It is Locked On Jazz for the 18th of July. The Jazz at a European 6-6 wing. Who is he? What does it mean? Plus a new assistant coach. What's the latest on the Donovan Mitchell trades and a redo of #AskLOJ? It's all coming up on the Monday edition of Locked On Jazz. Pow!
You are Locked On Jazz, your daily podcast on the Utah Jazz. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
How are you? I'm David Locke, radio voice of the Utah Jazz, Jazz NBA insider. This is Locked On Jazz, your daily podcast on the Utah Jazz, giving you insight, expertise, geeky numbers, and hopefully making it way better to be a Jazz fan each and every day. Thank you so much for making Locked On Jazz your first listen each and every day. I just want to apologize. Thanks to Holly Rowe, who reached out to me. Friday's show, I guess, was an audio disaster. I pulled both of them. The questions were great. I was going to redo it this weekend. It didn't happen, and I just thought it would get buried. So what I want to do is I'm actually going to go back. We'll go back to Ask LOJ because it was so good. And the questions were so great. But we obviously have some news to deal with first. The Jazz have signed Simone Fontecchio, who joins the Jazz as a free agent, signing a 2-year deal. Fontechio, I kind of asked around, talked to our European scout, and found out a little bit about him. So here's what, I haven't watched much of him, right? So 26 years old with a little bit upside left in him is the feeling the Jazz have on him. He has got great positional size. He can shoot. He's pretty athletic, and he's good in the open court. He's a worker and competitor on defense. Simone Fontecchio, and he at 6'8", I said 6'6", different listings, different places. His Wikipedia is 6'6", 6'8". There was a European thing from his very early stages that had him at 6'6", but I think he's kind of generally now thought of as, or now maybe he's grown, right? Like it could be in something when he was 16 years old. So he's 6'8", 209 pounds. He's played in a lot of different places. His three-point shooting over the last few years has been over 40%. It's 38% for his European career, which started in 2012. And he wasn't a great shooter to start, so it's really been in the recent years that he's added that into his game to become a better three-point shooter. Pretty high plus 100 volume. On the rule of 750, which is the last 750 threes you take are the indicator for your next 750 threes. Since 2012, he's only taken 949, so his number there is probably 39, 40%. And so this is the best international prospect that was on the board from numerous reports. Draft Express, who does a very good job with that. And so the Jazz have grabbed him for a 2-year contract. And he joins the Jazz, and then we'll see. The obvious easy one is to immediately compare him to Joe Ingles. I don't know if that's true, but I do get nervous just that same height, and we decide that that's the case. He's from Italy, so maybe he's Danilo Gallinari. One thing I thought was, either way you want to look at it, he doesn't go to the line a great deal. In his 25, 30 minutes a night, he goes to the line about 1 or 2 times a game. So he's not that he's going to be a complimentary player. He's not that pure scorer, Danilo Gallinari type actually, who just goes to the basket and puts it on the hoop and drives and seems to get that, just at least statistically. From that end, he does get about an assist a half to 2 assists a game, and he grabs a few rebounds. I don't know a lot about him. I've watched highlight videos. It's kind of my least favorite way of trying to evaluate whether a player's any good or not. But the Jazz, universally thought of as the number one international prospect, and it's a wing on a roster spot on a roster that doesn't have wings right now. So that was an important pickup there. The other one is the Jazz added Jason Terry to the coaching staff. I was wildly impressed with Jason Terry throughout the coaching search, in that he played 19 years in the NBA. He then decided that he wanted to be an assistant coach at Arizona, took that to be taking a G League head coaching job and living on the buses again. It showed me a love of the game and an incredible desire to be great, and not someone who's too big big for things, and I thought that was really impressive. So very excited to have Jason Terry on the staff, and I'm pretty certain Jason Terry is going to be a future NBA head coach. Everybody I know who knows Jet from Seattle just speaks the world of him as just one of the great guys in the business, and who really just truly has a passionate love for the game. And those are the kind of guys like Antonio Lang was one people want to know, like, how did this fall apart? One of the things was just some of those personalities that love being around the game as much got hired away or things like that. Antonio Lang was a valuable piece that always was in a good mood in the building for the Jazz. And then when he left, that hurt. Donovan Mitchell has not been traded as of yet. It's kind of a funny little news cycle, right? If you watch what's happened here, the Jazz aren't taking calls. Then they are taking calls. Then they're super close with the Knicks. And now it's like quiet. And there's time to play this game. And then the rumors today are that the Nets might be involved. So there's pressure points being played here on all accounts. And it's going to be interesting to see. Danny has probably been very clear to the Knicks of what it is that he wants. I'm guessing he wants at least 4 unprotected or close to unprotected picks from the New York Knicks. I'm sure he wants a pick swap or 2, depending on if he gets 4 unprotected picks. I'm sure he wants some of their other draft capital. They have 8 picks over the next 4 years. And you're probably wanting something in that realm. You probably have 1 or 2 of those you want. I don't know about RJ Barrett. We talked about that last week. I think RJ Barrett, and maybe it was on on the questions. So I'll get into this. RJ Barrett's interesting in that you have to kind of figure out where his timeline is. My feeling on RJ Barrett is his actual value to both the Jazz and the Knicks might be as a tradable asset. So the Knicks, Zion Williamson and John Moran have signed. RJ Barrett's the next pick. He hasn't signed. And RJ Barrett is, kind of this great big regular numbers, but not great other numbers. And so there's a little bit of a question on how good is he and how valuable is he to the team. And if you look at his pick and roll numbers are really low, his drive numbers are really low, but his points per game are really high. And so what do the Knicks want to do with him? Well, they can extend him on a really, really big deal. And then if you trade for Don, your team is Donovan Mitchell, Jalen Brunson, and RJ Barrett. Is that getting it done? And if you don't think that's getting done, then really RJ Barrett's value to you is to move him for your next set of assets that go along with Donovan Mitchell and Jalen Brunson, who you've just signed. From a Jazz standpoint, you go sign RJ Barrett. He gives you a player who can put it in the basket, probably keeps you moderately okay offensively. And you sign him the extension. You have plenty of cap space, so that money's probably not a big problem for you if you're in the midst of a full retool or rebuild after letting Donovan go. And so it's not a big deal to sign that contract. You're then really using that as an asset to move. Same concept, to be able to kind of continue to build your asset base. So my guess is that from the Jazz standpoint, RJ Barrett is only valuable to them if getting him and moving him at a later date, or maybe he develops into your first piece of your stars. I do fundamentally believe in kind of having the pieces spaced out a little bit age-wise. Maybe he's your first star, but I'm not certain of that. His value is like, well, if I don't take RJ Barrett, what do I get instead? If I take RJ Barrett, I get you're not getting extra. You probably get a 1 or 2 less first-round picks in the Knicks' mind because you took RJ Barrett. Well, I'm not doing that unless I can go get 2 first-round picks for RJ Barrett. Would be the way I would guess the Jazz are looking at the RJ Barrett front. So we'll watch this with Donovan. I mean, Donovan's camp has been nicely quiet here, and that I think Donovan's perfectly prepared to come back to Utah. And I don't think the Jazz are awful in any way, shape, or form right now. In fact, I think they're, they'll probably still be one of the elite offensive teams as they're constructed at this moment. Now, is that the team that gets to? They're certainly short defensively. It'll be interesting to see how they defend. They could drop from 11th defensively to 28th pretty quickly right now with the way the roster is built, depending on whether Walker Kessler, Udoka Azubuike, or Jared Vanderbilt can really play center and we can get any defense, or whether or not you just spread us out and we have no rim protection and then it's straight line to the basket would be pretty ugly. But offensively, this team's still going to be great as it's constructed right now. So it's not the Jazz are not a bad club at this point in time. It will be, obviously if we move Donovan, we're into full rebuild, and we seem to be willing to do that. So it'll be interesting to see how this plays. I mean, it's probably I'm guessing the Knicks don't have any doubt right now on what Danny Ainge wants. And I'm sure that's perfectly clear. And then they're going to try to figure out whether there's some point along the way where Danny would waver on that. And I can't see that day happening anytime in the next 12 months. I can't see why. What would be the point where the Jazz would say, actually, we're not. Yeah, we'll only take 3. Like, I don't see where that comes in the next 12 months, where from a Knicks standpoint, I'm not sure the Knicks are good yet. Like, I think the Knicks are probably the 10th best team in the Eastern Conference right now with the way their roster is constructed. So when they start the year, 4-7 or even 5-5, and they don't have Donovan, and this thing starts to percolate up, I think that the trade package is actually no different at that point than it is today. And I think that there becomes amped pressure on the Knicks if they don't start the year 10-5. So if you're looking for pressure points, I think that's where that is. All right, we will get into Ask LOJ. I'm so sorry, and it's a bummer. And I was on I'm not big into excuses. If you heard, you probably didn't, I said early on, we've had a bunch of technical difficulties. You actually can see it. Like, my graphics are not right anymore. So all sorts of things have kind of gone askew here as I've been traveling and moving different places. But I'm back home, so hopefully the audio at least is working as well as it possibly can. Today's show is a Monday edition. It's brought to you by our friends over at Murdoch Chevy, located in Woods Cross, also in Logan. The Murdoch family has been in Utah now for over 80 years and maintaining those relationships. Chevy, there's just nothing that says Americana like Chevy. The Silverado and the Colorado trucks are the best trucks on the market with the Chevy build to it, and the Silverado is really, really incredible. And the great SUV lineup with the Blazer, the Equinox, the Traverse, and the Bolt is the electric car on it. It's all at Chevy, at Murdoch Chevy, located in Woods Cross, as well as in Logan. If you're going to stop by, feel free to email me first. Today's show is also brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline.net is your number one source for all your betting needs and sports information. Find all the latest sports developments, league reviews, and news, including this year's NHL playoffs that have wrapped up, so you're looking for the next year odds after the draft. Major League Baseball. BetOnline is your continued source for all your sport wagering information, including live betting, esports, and more. They have I got an email of the MVP odds that are out there at this point for everyone. And Luka Doncic is the favorite to win the MVP this next year. I think that's probably seems pretty reasonable on all that. And then Donovan is way down. So, like, if you believe Donovan's got a chance to have a massive year for the Jazz or the Knicks and break through in a manner that suddenly gives the gives him a new 35 points a game. Maybe he goes nuts. It'll be interesting to see what happens with him, but he is the one leading the way on that. The other he's down at about plus, I think, 5. I don't remember what it was, but it was really far down. So if you believe in Don and you want to make a wild card bet, that would be a fun one to throw out there. It's all at BetOnline.net. By the way, speaking of BetOnline, super fun project going on the NFL side of things, and that is that we are doing the top 50 NFL players who are top 50 NFL players that impact the betting lines. So who are the 50 best NFL players that impact the betting line? And amazingly, TJ Watt came out in front of Aaron Donald. Myles Garrett came out in front of Aaron Donald today, so I was a little surprised by both those. Those are all Locked on NFL on YouTube. You also can get it on all sorts of Roku apps as well. All right, let's get to our questions and apologize again for the problems. Richard says, even after all the podcast talk, I still have a hard time understanding why trade Donovan Mitchell. We have him for 3 more years. He isn't asking out. He's an incredible athlete in person. We struck gold. He's a once-in-a-decade draft success, so let's enjoy it. I think a lot of people are right there with you, Richard. So the reason to trade Donovan a little bit, is your point, is you have him for 3 more years, and then he would be free to. I don't know, probably, but he would be free to leave. Most guys do leave. Most guys at that point have the right to choose where they want to live and where they want to spend the rest of their career. And so there's a high likelihood that after those 3 years, as most players other than Steph Curry and Giannis Antetokounmpo and Nikola Jokic have done, that they would take the opportunity to go find a new place. So part of it is that, if there is a moment in time. The second one is that, once you've traded Rudy, maybe you're making the next step, which is that you move Don. But I agree with you on he's just wonderful to watch. He's fabulous in our community. He's been incredibly important to us. He was our July 4th savior. He's just a wonderful kid. He's a fabulous person to have. We're lucky to have him. Every single day you root for 45, good things are going to happen. So I absolutely understand where you're coming from, Richard. The pragmatic basketball side says once you've made the first deal, you're probably on the road to making the second if you can get the right amount of assets. But clearly also, Danny has shown we're only doing this if it's for the right amount of assets. And Danny has done an entire retool with Paul Pierce as the primary player. So he's done this before without going all the way to the bottom and letting everyone go. So we'll see. But I agree. Don is absolutely marvelous in both on and off the floor, and has been, and it's been incredible to watch. And you go to the arena every night not knowing what might happen next, which is just such a great feeling. And so, yes, I'm with you in a lot of what you're having to say, Richard. Michael says, losing Ingles and Niang was a big blow to the locker room over the past year. How important is it to have a great locker room, guys? His personality, locker room presence, something the team rates just like other abilities. I think it is really, really important, Michael. And if we go into a rebuild, it's important too. You have to have an environment in which people want to come to work. That's the most important thing. And when Niang was there, and I have said this before, I think we lost Joe Ingles, the player. Joe Ingles aging and then ACL meant that we lost Joe Ingles, the player. And to me, Joe Ingles, the player, was far more valuable than Joe Ingles, the locker room guy. Joe's fun, prickly, as Andy Larson called him in the paper. He also, he's a guy, but it's important that there's other guys around. And Niang just had the greatest, I enjoyed going to the building more every day because of George Niang. And then Derek Favors was such a selfless soul, that he set a tone for everyone that if he was willing to do what he was going to do, then you weren't worried about it, and he wasn't worried about it, then it kind of eliminated your ability to work. You couldn't have your own gripes when Derek didn't have his. So those two to me, it's Niang and Favors, which got replaced by Hassan Whiteside and Rudy Gay, which changed the dynamic a little bit on the team, plus the past scars. But to your question, certainly massively important to have that great locker room feel, because it makes guys want to come to work. It makes people eager. Guys, I could probably, if I went through it, I bet you if we kept a stat on time in the building, I would guess that each player was spending 35, 40 minutes more per day in the building 2 years ago than they did last year. It just wasn't as good an environment, right? You weren't as happy. You had some bad experiences with losses. Things you just weren't chilling, hanging out in the beautiful practice facility the Jazz have built the same way. I've seen comments, it was a cancerous locker room, things Dad, Joe's trade was huge. You were close to this. How bad was it? Is there a book? So this is great follow-up question, Corey. There's not a book. It's not it was not fights. It was not people throwing things. There wasn't massive problems. I don't think the Joe trade was huge, frankly. I kind of have said this a lot. Joe had torn his ACL at that point. I don't think Joe would have been an important locker room presence on his crutches. It wasn't it's subtle. And really, maybe my 35 minutes a minute ago was too much, but maybe not. It's just subtle. You get out of the house 15 minutes earlier and you get to the arena 15 minutes earlier, because when you're putting on your shoes and getting dressed and doing your stuff, you're going to walk through the eating area and stop and talk to someone and have a laugh and have a joke, and everyone's in a good mood. And then you're going to get ready for practice. And then after practice, you're going to do a shooting game, and then you'll go back and you probably grab another little something to eat in the beautiful, almost like lodge-esque area they have to eat and talk to someone. And then you just end up spending 15 minutes on each side of practice more in the building, because there's just a great vibe and a great energy and everything that's going on. And you just spend a little less time. There wasn't, as I've said this a million times, if you watched every practice between Donovan and Rudy, you would never have bought the national narrative that there was a problem there. You would never see it. They communicated all the time. They interacted. They high-fived in practice. I was on a team. I was with a team as the play-by-play announcer where literally the dysfunction was such that a player would yell across the floor to another player to have them tell that player what they were supposed to do because they weren't talking to that player. Okay? Like, I've been there. I've seen that where literally the communication between two people on the team have stopped happening in any way, shape, or form because they're to such a point that this player yells across, tell that person that they're supposed to rotate over the top of them because they won't speak to them. Nothing like that. There's no massive drama. It would be a really boring soap opera. It just was the slow breakdown of positive collective energy. You know, as a reporter last year, I asked Chauncey Billups and Joe Dumars when I saw him and other people, whenever I saw someone who was a champion, I asked them about their past failures and how it formed their championship team. And they all told the same story about that those losses solidified them and brought them together, and their scars bonded them, and they became less selfish and more selfless. It's the same story that builds a championship. What I failed to do as a reporter was talk to all the people that were on good teams that never won it and ask them about how their past failures tore them apart. Because that's really what happened to the Utah Jazz, was that the past failures that they had from the bubble, the great revival in the bubble. Remember, we weren't in a great place going into the bubble. The revival that was built in the bubble, and then the loss to the Clippers, and we just never got through that. And then COVID this year was bad. Like January, the losses in January just continued to kind of perpetrate that feeling amongst the club and it just never got going. Quinn talked about the spark. It was super interesting to me listening to Will Hardy talking about the Spurs championship run. He was on the Woj podcast talking about the Spurs championship run that they had coming back from when they lost to Miami and Ray Allen. And he talked about it was the hardest year he'd ever been a part of. And that, frankly, they were down in the first round and about to lose. And then when they got through that first round series, it kind of propelled them. That's what Quinn was saying kind of behind the scenes. And in my conversations with Quinn the whole time was, we just need one collective positive experience. And the hope was it was the Donovan to Rudy pass, but it wasn't enough. Had they somehow gotten by Dallas, there is a belief that it could have been enough to propel them forward and get them past Phoenix and past other people, maybe not the Warriors, but maybe with just a little juice, that they needed a positive collective experience and they never got it. And it was super interesting to hear Will Hardy talk about how, you know, that they were in the Spurs with all of their pedigree were in the search for the exact same thing after that dreadful loss to Ray Allen in Miami. At what point all the trade talk and rumors about Donovan going to take a toll on him and the rest of the team? This is a super question. This is from Brandon. So I think this is a super question. There's no doubt that with all of this talk, he's human, that Donovan hasn't taken a second recently and thought about the possibility of being a Knick, right? Like, that's just natural. Like, that at some point here, he has thought to himself of what it would be like to be a Knick, and what it would be like to play in Madison Square Garden, and what it would be like. And anytime that happens, you know, it's your mind wanders and you begin to wonder what it would be like. Like, that's a very natural, I don't think there's anything strange or wrong about him having that feeling that's very, very natural. So when that has an impact on you, I mean, it's no different than if you're searching for a job and you start to think about your next job. It's hard to come back to your current job if you've really begun to think about that other one. So it does have a toll on him. But Donovan's a total pro. He's done the best he can to insulate himself from a lot of this stuff. And I think, you know, we've never seen him do anything but be a pro. And so I would suspect he can figure out a way to handle it, as difficult as it might be. Hate to play the what-if game, but I thought it was interesting that Tony Jones said 8 years of good GMing by Dennis Lindsay was undone by the Jazz pick of Doak over Jaden McDaniels and Desmond Bane. How different do you think things are now if you picked one of those guys? Whew, that's a lot to chew on. We'll answer that in just a second as we continue on today's edition of Locked On Jazz, which is brought to you in part by our friends over at Built Bars. What's up right now? Toffee almond is back and on sale. It does contain nuts. They're nice enough to tell us it's a nut allergy. What puffs are out there? The coconut brownie chunk puff, super. Orange dreamsicle puff, super. Brownie batter puff, sold out. Oh, coconut marshmallow churro and banana cream pie are all there, plus the regular bars. And when you're talking Built Bar, you're talking the most remarkable macros: 130 calories, 2.5 fat grams, 4 net carbs, 4 sugars, 6 grams of fiber, and 17 grams of protein. So the numbers that matter: 130 calories, 2.5 fat grams, just 4 grams of sugar, and 17 grams of protein. That's on the basic Built Bar. Some of these are a little different. For example, the coconut marshmallow has 6 grams, puff has 6 grams of sugar. By the way, I tasted I don't know if they're going to come out with it, cookie dough puffs. Woohoo! Super good. Promo code LOCKED15 gets you 15% off. That's the best discount you can find at Built.com. That's 15% off at Built.com. Thank you very much for making Locked On Jazz your first listen of the day. For your second listen, if you want to get into it now, Locked On NBA Big Board, but at Locked On NBA, they are talking about the Donovan Mitchell situation and trading of him as well. We might have to have the Knicks guys on and see what we can get from them in a deal. I'll play Danny Ainge. That'll be fun. All powerful Danny Ainge. So the question here is, Tony Jones said 8 years of good GMing by Dennis Lindsay was undone when the Jazz picked Doak over Jane McDaniels and Desmond Bane. So I think there's a long show to be done here if Donovan gets traded. I'm probably going to hold off until Donovan gets traded of like where the window closed. Justin and Tanny said they thought that window was closed. Like, how did that window close? What were the places where the door could have been jammed open? Retrospective on our moves, which is, a lot easier than actually making the moves, doing a retrospective on them. This was not a great draft for the Jazz. There was a lot that went on that season that was strange. The 3 main moves that season were drafting Doak, signing Favors to a $9 million contract, and re-signing Rudy. And they were incongruent. It was almost as though we were just preparing for the possibility that we weren't going to re-sign Rudy. And everything was about that, or almost as though we were trying to have leverage on Rudy in negotiations. I'm not sure. There are a lot of people who really did like Doak in that draft, though he probably could have been had a little bit later. Jaden McDaniels was an obvious need with his length and athleticism, and Desmond Bane has become super. Dennis Lindsay, I do know, was a very big proponent of Doak and thought he was the right pick. I do know that other departments, the analytics kind of had their guy, other scouting people had their guy. When you get down to 27 in a draft, it's never universal, so that's not unusual, but it makes for a good story. But yeah, that one's an easy one to jump on and say, and hopefully Doak turns this around. He's working hard right now. He's in Salt Lake. He's working super hard to try to come back. We can't blame Doak for the fact that 2 other kids have played well. That I have a hard time saying that one pick, but we just didn't maximize the pieces around Donovan and Rudy. Our big throw was Mike Conley. Milwaukee's big one was Drew Holiday. Phoenix's big one was Chris Paul. And, of the 3, ours probably had the least impact, but he was also got us to the number 1 regular season record one year. So hard to say that. If you could have added something else there, could it have helped a little bit? Maybe. It's a butterfly effect, right? So if you get Jaden McDaniels, you think he's good, are you able to trade Royce for something at an earlier stage? Are you willing to trade? There was probably a moment in time where you should have traded Joe if you weren't going to sign him an extension, and we didn't do it because we just didn't have a replacement for him. So there's a bunch of those type of things that took place. And then by the end of it, what accelerated it, frankly, is just having no cap room and no draft picks. There was no mechanism by which to continue to grow. We really had, The extra pick we end up giving to Mike Conley, the pick we end up having to give up for Derek Favors, those end up limiting what the Jazz had as options to be able to build around Donovan, Rudy, and ended up in this circumstance where they were this offseason, where there was just absolutely nothing to do, right? Like, we went through the decision-making tree, we didn't have draft picks, didn't have free agent money. So then you're trading Mike, well, that doesn't happen, then what are you doing? Are there sleeper teams that could jump in for the Mitchell trade circuit? Thunder, Memphis, Pelicans, Magic, Clippers, Raptors. Raptors maybe. Don't see Clippers. Don't see Pelicans, because I think the upgrade from Donovan over CJ is not monumental enough. But it is better. Don't see Memphis because of Ja Morant. Do see Brooklyn as a possibility. Do see the Knicks. It really only takes one to start to have to. If the Knicks think there's a chance they're going to lose Donovan Mitchell, then that's a massive pressure point for him. There's two massive pressure points that are waiting for the Knicks. One is a 500 start, any season start other than 10-5. Like, I might check when the schedules come out in the middle of August, I might check the Knicks schedule before I check our schedule. And then the second one would be if somebody else starts to get involved. How many total first round picks do you think we end up with after the teardown? I love this. Fun. All right, so we have 4. We have 4 from the Minnesota. We have 5 for Royce O'Neal. I think Bojan yields 1 if we trade him. That would be 6. I think Donovan yields 4 to trade him. I think it's take 4 and something else. So let's call it 5 with pick swap in there. So that gets us to 11. Mike might get you a protected one if you're moving that. That's 12. I would go with 12. I would set my over-under at 11. And you can decide whether you want to go over or under. You can, in the YouTube comments, you can decide over or under on 11 picks that the Jazz get, first-round picks from other people. Maybe 12's the over-under on that by the time this is done. Giving up all those picks and players doesn't seem like a good plan for the Knicks. Could it be Danny knows? If he gets a ton of assets, great, but more likely if no one is willing to pay the price, he can shut down all the Don talk and get Don to work in Utah. Yeah, I mean, Don's got to play along, and he's a good kid, so I think he does. Like, I mean, I do think there's a level here where you're saying to Don, like, we got what you want, which is eventually to end up in New York. I don't know if that's true, but let's assume. And we know what they want, so we're willing to do what we can, but we can only do what's good for the franchise, and they're not willing to play along. So let's go through the season. We'll keep the conversation open, and then Don just needs to keep playing great. And Don's a great kid, so I think that you end up, that there's something to that. Like, you're not placating sounds like in an authoritative, almost like parent to a 7-year-old. I don't think that, but I do think there is something there where, you know, if you're not taking, you know, we're hanging up every phone call, that kind of weird, mysterious idea that, like, they called and you hung up. If that was the case, then yeah, Don probably has some right to be upset. Does it worry you at all that most of the picks we are getting might be getting for the Knicks if Don is traded would be 15 to 25? Can we build a championship the way Boston had at least number 2, number 3 picks and went that route? So this is why we redid the Ask LOJ show, because these questions are great. So Jeremy, on one level, yes, Minnesota, it continues to be good. The Knicks, you also push these things out far enough and long enough that you have the variability that things could happen, from trades to injuries to decline in play to whatever, where those unprotected picks become valuable the way Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum did for Danny in Boston. The other thing, though, is that in the midst of this, you as a team are losing games and playing to the front side of the draft. So it's actually, what you're trying to do is say, from the Jazz standpoint, well, you have 4 years of trying to acquire low draft picks, you know, top 5, top 10 picks that build the foundation of your next existence. And then you're using your Minnesota and Knicks picks either to acquire other assets or to acquire complementary players, or to trade together to move up to get even another one if you have a player you're really hot after. It's just giving you flexibility and possibilities to do what you need to do. And so, but truthfully, the best picks, if you build this plan, likelihood are over the next 4 years when you're not winning a lot, the way Houston and Oklahoma City and Detroit have done recently, and Orlando, but they haven't been very successful at it until this year where they got the number 1 pick. And so you're playing that game. And frankly, with the way the lottery odds right now are, you probably better be not very good. You're going to have to get lucky if you're going to try to get a number 1 pick. You got to do it for 3 or 4 or 5 years to be able to get, one of the top picks because the lottery odds have been flattened a little bit. All right, let's take one or two more. What supporting crew would it take to make Don want to stay? I mean, I think that's that's the interesting kind of effort Danny has to make is if the deal doesn't go down and Don's playing and we're sitting at 6-6 and something starts to happen in the league where you suddenly might be able to add another piece to the puzzle, can you build with Don in a manner that makes him feel comfortable about the future? If the Jazz do go trade Don and go into full rebuild, how many years do you think it'll take for us to be a playoff team again? We did it in one last time, which was really remarkable. I do think it's a 4 or 5 year, let's watch. Let's see what Oklahoma City does. Let's see what Houston does. They're in year 2 and 3. Detroit's in year 3. It's worth us going back and doing a research project on this to kind of see how long it took Oklahoma City. They were the first to do it when they moved from Seattle and decided to play the movie Major League to Seattle as they tried to move. So I think that's it. Great question. Super appreciate this. This has been an often asked question I want to get to. Does the All-Star game being played in Utah next year affect Donovan's situation? I think that's very clear. No. Here's another really good one. If Quinn knew the Jazz were headed to a full rebuild, do you think he would have left? I actually don't think that had a big impact on Quinn in the sense that I think that Quinn actually would be great with a rebuild. And probably the year he enjoyed coaching the most was the first when he was rebuilding. And finally, why do we trade Rudy to Minnesota when we know Donovan is the cat guy? Have a great one. Thanks for tuning in. This is Locked On Jazz, part of the Locked On Podcast Network.